RetroDaze.
The ability to get in touch with friends and family over long distances is, perhaps, something we take for granted these days. After all, pretty much anyone you'd need to speak to can quickly and easily be reached via text message, social media DMs, video calls, or cell phone calls. We've emerged into a period of history when it's actually harder to avoid someone than it is stay in touch with them.
That, of course, hasn't always been the case, and if we were to take a trip back a mere few decades, this tiny crack of disconnection widens into a Grand Canyon-sized gap. A time when, if you missed a phone call, not only would the person calling not necessarily hear back from you for a while, but you yourself might be hours away from even knowing a call had been missed. It was a time mostly without the internet and cell phones, but we had another clever bit of technology to help keep us connected, even in those early days of telecommunication: the answering machine. As we discussed in episode 105, Nostalgic Means of Communication, the kickoff of the telephone age occurred on March 7, 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell beat Elijah Gray to the patent office by a mere 4 hours, securing his patent for the telephone, over which Gray sued unsuccessfully. As a newly constructed telephone service grew alongside the customer base, another need became apparent: the ability to somehow catalog or record missed calls. Remember, these were the days of landlines, something that has become increasingly rare to see in houses these days. When you had to leave the house to, be a functioning member of society, you also had to leave your poor phone behind, right along with anyone who might try to get in touch with you during the day. By 1898, there were already developments being made toward this goal, as Valdemar Poulsen, a Danish telephone engineer, patented a device he called a telegraphone, which was capable of recording conversations on the telephone. 1914 brought a similar technology called the telescribe that allowed for recording conversations to wax cylinders. Though Thomas Edison's invention was groundbreaking, it was nonetheless a failure until later redesigned. Through the 20s and 30s, there were a number of other recording devices that used wax cylinders, including the phonograph, dictaphone, and teletophone. The next major leap forward was in 1935 with Willie Mueller's 3-foot-tall answering machine, which was the first automatic device made, though the form factor certainly left something to be desired. Jumping forward to 1960, Dr. Kazuo Hashimoto's Answerphone for PhoneTel was the first answering machine to be sold in the United States. Even so, there were some pitfalls and roadblocks to complete consumer adoption of the new technology. For one thing, though it seemed a new type of answering machine came out almost every year through the 60s, most of them were not commercially viable. For another, AT&T, who held a monopoly on telecommunication in the United States, would not allow the use of any third-party technology in conjunction with their phones, only finally allowing their proprietary answering machines in the 1950s. During these early days of telephone service, consumers did not own their telephones. The equipment was rented from the corporations. In the United States, that meant AT&T, and in the UK, it was the General Post Office, or GPO. AT&T's control over telecommunications was finally broken in 1984, allowing consumers, for the first time, to purchase their own telephone and answering machine equipment for the home, leading to something of an answering machine boom.
Now you can get Radio Shack's TAD 325 telephone answerer for only $149.95. For $149.95. $149.95. He did it again. Radio Shack, $149.95. Remote control function, programmable security code, variable message length, and much, much more. And at $149.95, they won't last long.
Come, touch technology from Radio Shack.
Depending on when you were born, it's likely that the first answering machine in your household was one decorated with fake wood paneling, like some strange piece of tiny furniture meant to blend in with the rest of these 70s crossover decor. And if you're young enough to have never owned an answering machine, well, no one would fault you for taking one look at this thing and thinking it was an Atari variant you've never heard of. Between the rectangular form factor, electronic components, and wood laminate, I'd consider it a pretty good guess. This was, for some reason, the predominant style of answering machines at the time. The previous Radio Shack unit in the commercial, the TAD-325, is a perfect example, or even the earlier TAD-311 dual cassette telephone answering machine. Both units came with remote turn-on features as well. Perhaps the most pervasive of these wood grain units was the Panasonic EasyPhone. Model KXT1520 features a flip-up top to reveal 2 cassette players, one for your outgoing message and one for the incoming messages. The silver portion on the lower quarter of the machine boasted a number of controls for the cassettes and messages. The KXT1521 added the additional functionality of a battery-operated pickup remote controller that allowed you to listen to, skip, and record messages. Not to be left out, AT&T rocked their own wood grain models as well. The 2300C answering system looked very much like the others and featured many of the same abilities, including beepless remote access as advertised on the box. The Record-A-Call Electronic 690 was yet another, and perhaps the first, answering machine with fake wood grain and featured dual lines. Clearly, though, there were plenty of other brands, models, and styles being produced and sold through the 1980s. The Codaphone Model 5500, for instance, came out in 1981 and had an all-metal outer construction, giving it a more industrial design as it was sold mainly for commercial use. Or the PhoneMate Model 940 in 1983, which, in part, advertised the answering machine to football fans, suggesting they wouldn't miss the game because of unwanted calls anymore. There were also units made with the phone attached, like the PhoneMate Model 6950. While these weren't specifically advertised for commercial use, due to their higher cost and specific functionality, you did see these in offices more often than in someone's living room.
Believe it or not, George isn't at home. Please leave a message at the beep. I must be out before I pick up the phone. Where could I be? Believe it or not, I'm not home.
At some point in the creation and use of answering machines, someone, or more likely many someones, realized it'd be a lot of fun to leave a silly outgoing message for people calling the house. There were all kinds of variations on the comedic outgoing message, like the old chestnut of pretending you were actually on the phone, only to reveal it was in fact the answering machine the whole time.
Hello, David Basner.
Hi, Basner. Andrew Woolridge. I want you to meet me tomorrow.
What? Listen, I'm sorry. We must have a bad connection. Could you speak a little louder, please?
Sure. Andrew Woolridge here. I'd like you to meet me tomorrow at...
Wait, please. Speak into the phone. I told you, I can't hear you.
I am speaking into the damn phone. This is Andrew Woolridge!
Okay, stop shouting. It's not really me. You got my machine, and all the shouting in the world isn't going to bring the beep any sooner. So, wait for the beep and relax, and thanks for calling.
You could take a note from George Costanza's playbook and record a musical entry, or if you really wanted to torture your friends, get the whole family involved for a wholesomely cringy moment recorded to tape forevermore. For those of us lacking imagination, 80s merchandising had us covered.
Hey, how are you? Sorry that I'm not at home. But when I get the message on my telephone, you'll be the first one on my list.
Crazy Calls, a tape of 7 different songs and funny recordings for answering machines.
I am very sorry that I'm not at home to take your call.
Only $14.95.
When I will get right back to you. Leave your message at the tone.
Give someone the gift of gab for their answering machine.
Calling a friend. What you've actually done is bought a one-way ticket to the answering machine zone.
Nobody's home. Nobody's home. I'm glad you called, but I'm not home. But I'll be back before too long. You gotta
Crazy Calls, a tape of 7 different songs and funny recordings for only $14.95.
Wait for the beat. You gotta leave your name. You gotta leave your number.
To order?
Wait for the beat.
Call 1-800-351-5200. Call 1-800-351-5200.
There was nothing quite like a full cassette tape of ridiculous answering machine messages to annoy the crap out of those pesky telemarketers. Just screen your calls with this bad boy, and you can bet there wouldn't be a single dinner time sales call again for a while. There were so many of these things that there's even a website called noveltyanswerinmachine.com maintained by Matthew Furman, which claims to be the world's largest archive of novelty telephone recordings. Perusing the site, you'll find a number of audio categories including At the Sound of the Beep, celebrity answer-alls, Radio Shack, rich little phonies, and more. In fact, they even had the Crazy Calls classics from the commercial we played earlier, but interestingly, Furman was asked to take the recordings down, as stated on their website. M&I Recording Studios is now in the process of bringing back Crazy Calls, therefore Crazy Calls can no longer be featured here on this page. Unfortunately, when you follow the link, it seems that the re-release of these classic answering machine messages is no longer being sold, though you can find other information and links to videos on their webpage, crazycallsclassics.com, like their grand return in 1991.
The beat, more than a tone.
Crazy Calls, those fabulous musical messages for your answering machine are back with the new generation.
Waiting for the beat zone. Gonna have to do it when you hear that song. Gotta leave
7 brand new recordings for your answering machine.
Well, you know that I'm at the fiesta. I will call when I take a siesta. So when you hear the beep, then you besta. How could I call if you don't leave your name?
Give the gift of gab to your answering machine with Crazy Calls, the new generation.
Your name and number when you hear that sound. That is the only way I can.
Only $14.95.
Well, the name's gone, but my phone is on. You gotta leave a message, and before too long, you're gonna hear a sound.
Crazy Calls, the new generation.
You're gonna have to put it down.
Call 1-800-832-5200, only $14.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-832-5200.
As answering machines were phased out for voicemail systems and cell phones took over landlines, so did the once pervasive home technology become just another piece of obsolete tech. Heck, these days, most people don't even bother leaving messages when they can just shoot off a quick text to their friends or family. And sure, maybe it's more convenient. Maybe it's easier to have a phone in your pocket all day and never have to worry about missing an important call or message, but it's also a lot more boring. Well, at least to this Gen X grown up anyway. What about you? Do you miss answering machine messages and all their pop culture trappings, or do you prefer the new way of staying in touch? Well, I'd love to hear about it down in the comments, and if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate yesteryear, right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clacky.